So, which cards were the most underrated from Forged in the Barrens? In other words, cards we all thought were going to suck, but have actually ended up being pretty meta relevant, and in some cases, actually, even I would argue, meta dominant. There are a few of those in this video. Before we get into things, I would like to note this is sponsored by Keeps, which we'll talk about a little later, but for now, let's talk about Kargal Battle Scar. This guy was rated at only 2.8 stars by the community. I myself only gave Kargal 2 stars, but it turns out there early in the Forged and the Barrens meta, Kargal Battlescar was actually kind of everywhere. It peaked at 16% of all decks in that early meta as a neutral card being played across a variety of classes, and that's pretty solid for a neutral card. You know, not many cards hit that kind of meta-wide mark at all. And of course, it was so prominent, in fact, that the watch posts that enable Kargal Battlescar, a handful of them ended up getting nerfed, the two most popular ones. And Kargal has certainly fallen out of flavor since then. That's why I used his peak numbers here as opposed to his current numbers. Not exactly popular today, but nonetheless, he was for a while, which means our ratings underestimated what Kargal could do. And for me, it was really just about like, listen, I don't think these watch posts are going to be worth committing that big of a chunk of your deck to. You know, you're going to have to run something like 5 to 7 cards to get this package in there. I wasn't totally in love with the watch post. So Kargal as like the follow-up piece for the watch post didn't seem worth it to me. And if you were going to run the watch post, I thought you were probably going to be a slower, more control style deck. And Kargal was kind of not necessarily a great fit for that as a card that's developing this mid to late game pressure board. Turns out, in fact, a lot of faster decks could run the watch post, and they loved having a way to summon a bunch of 5/5s on turn 7. That was very often a game-ending push in an otherwise pressure-based deck. So it surprised me kind of in every regard. I'm sure many other people fell into that same trap for Kargal, and it ended up being one of the better cards in Forged in the Barrens and one of the better packages. Certainly remaining maybe the most underrated of all, maybe not numerically speaking, but just kind of from an impact and surprise standpoint. This one really caught me personally off guard. So next up, we'll talk about Rocara here, another surprise legendary. She was rated at 3 stars by both myself and the community. We didn't think she was going to be particularly special, just kind of an average card. For me, 3 stars basically means, yeah, she'll pop into a low tier list as a non-core card, right? She'll be in some kind of tier 3 or tier 4 deck, and she won't be the most important part of that deck by any means. Something you could sub out, basically. In hindsight, though, as we're seeing, Rocara is actually a pretty good card in one of the best decks in the meta, which is Rush Warrior. She's in 81% of Warrior decks right now at high ranks. I don't know what other people are playing Warrior. She's really in 100% of the best Warrior deck, which is Rush Warrior. So a very good card, and feels good in Rush Warrior, I have to say. She's still not maybe like the best Rush Warrior card. She's not like enabling the deck. You could probably win games without her just fine, but she is a solid piece of that puzzle. Now, for me, the reasons I didn't like Rocara still kind of stand true for me a little bit. She's a follow-up card as opposed to like a setup. In other words, she's buffing after attacks already go through, which means she's not like pushing extra damage to face in particular, and she's not really helping you take trades. She's more about these like boards lingering behind with additional stats. But it turns out that's actually pretty important for Rush Warrior. They're often taking value trades, leaving behind a few minions on board that get to attack in the future, which helps Rocara, but also sometimes just when you play her straight up with some other minions, if they can take a slight value trade and get a buff, that just leaves behind a more threatening board. And each time that board gets a little bit more threatening or a few minions are left behind extra, your opponent has to check another removal off the box. Like, okay, I got to deal with that board, and then that board, and then eventually Rush Warrior kind of gets over the hump, sticking a board and hitting the opponent pretty hard in the face. So she contributes to that reload nature of Rush Warrior rather well, both on the front end and on the back end. And that's why I think Rocara has turned out to be a much better card in Rush Warrior than I expected. So that said, because Rocara has one of the most impressive heads of hair I've ever seen, even far more impressive than my own, let's talk about our sponsor for this video. Yeah, that's right. Our sponsor is Keeps, and I'm going to go big Regis for this one. If you don't know Keeps, they can help you keep your hair, because you may not know 2 out of 3 guys are going to suffer some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35. My 34th birthday is in like 2 weeks, so this is very top of mind for me, and I suspect it might be for you as well. And the cool thing about Keeps is you don't have to go see a doctor. You can get it sent right to your door, which makes it as easy as possible. You can keep grinding Hearthstone and just get it sent right to you. So if you've noticed you're losing your hair, it's time to do something about it. You can go to keeps.com/Regis, or you can hit that link in the description below, and you're going to get a limited time offer for 50% off your first order. All right, so next up, let's move over to Druid with Pride's Fury, rated at 2.6 stars by the community, which should be noted is abysmally low. You might be thinking like some of these like 3-star ratings sound like, yeah, that's kind of average. The community ratings almost never go below 2. Like the lowest scores are 2.1, because when you have multiple people rating, of course, you tend to clump more towards the middle. It's just a bell curve. People, some people think it's a 3, some people think it's a 1. Even though those 1s are there, they still get averaged into 2s, right? So 2.6 is really low. This is in like the bottom third of cards for sure. Bottom maybe 20, 25 cards, frankly. Anyway, Pride's Fury, I gave 3 stars. It's currently in half of Druid decks. Basically, all token Druids are running it. If you're running like a big clown or, ramp style Druid, it's not going to be in there. But in token Druids, which are the best Druids right now by win rate, it's in there. And that's because it's a good buff follow-up. And they lost some cards like, Savage Roar is not currently in standard. So you need more follow-ups to make sure your wide boards can connect in combination with cards like Gibberling. Pride's Fury is pretty powerful. It's stabilizing those crazy boards and pushing a little bit of extra damage. Now, for me, I just thought it wouldn't be enough. I thought one attack wasn't going to follow up as much as needed for Token Druid. I thought cards like Arbor Up were going to be much better at like securing lethals and pushes. But currently in the meta, stabilizing a board in Token Druid is kind of enough. There's just the health total on this is getting it over the breakpoints of certain removal cards, things like, Condemn for Priest, for instance, right? Like this is enough to help it stabilize. So it does make sense just because that health is worth it. They're getting a slightly slower push as Token Druid, but it's still a significant enough push to compete and win games. Now, interestingly, I do think Pride's Fury will actually fall off if Token Druid gets more high-pressure follow-ups or shuffles the list a little bit more aggressively as opposed to the kind of mid-game stabilization style they're playing right now. So I don't have a lot of faith in this one long-term, but it's already exceeded my expectations, so I was already proven wrong. Pride's Fury had a little more in the tank than I expected. All right, so now let's move on to another warrior card, and I think numerically this is probably the most underrated card of all because it came in at only 2.5 stars. That's just so crazy low. And it's in basically every best warrior deck right now, and warrior's one of the top couple decks in the game right now. And I only give this 2 stars personally because, I said the same thing I always say. Hand buff in Hearthstone has sucked. We've rarely ever had good hand buff cards. Really never in standard. Wild has gotten to the point where finally with magnetic and those sorts of things, hand buff makes a little bit more sense because you can put the stats into play immediately. And guess what? That's exactly why conditioning is good too. You can put the stats into play immediately thanks to rush minions because Rush Warrior has such a high percentage of minions that are rush, basically all of them more or less. These stats are not as delayed as they would normally be. So you can play this and you're going to get the payoff much sooner than normal on your hand buffs. The stats are going to hit the board and take an impact right away, sometimes the same turn. At the very least, over the next couple turns, it's going to start stacking up really nicely. And again, with Rush Warrior, when those stats are slightly bigger and those boards are able to value trade and hang around and present threats lingering behind, eventually one of those boards sticks and overwhelms your opponent, and that's how you win games. And conditioning is a really big part of that deck finding its success through value trades and additional damage output left on board. It's sort of the same story as the Rocara thing. The delayed stats here work out really well in exactly this list. And, conditioning, it's even at its base level, it's okay. I've played many 2-mana conditionings in Rush Warrior where it made a lot of sense, and then it just scales like crazy at 5 mana. It feels like it becomes a stupidly powerful card post 5 mana. And then you've also got stuff like Samuro that makes this card, even better. Crazy Samuro swing turns and stuff. So all in all, yeah, conditioning is really good. It's not just like a card that goes in Rush Warrior. I think it's a really good card that goes in Rush Warrior, and that's why we're seeing it in so many darn lists. And yeah, this is an easy 4-star plus card. And I sure thought it was only going to be 2. The community didn't think much better either. So we absolutely missed the mark on conditioning. Finally, hand buff is here. So next up here is Galloping Idiot, the Paladin secret, rated at only 2.9 stars by the community, but has been one of the most commonly played cards in all of Hearthstone because, of course, the secret Paladin package has been nuts. I only gave this one 3 stars as well. This is much closer to a 4+ star card. I don't think it's in that 5-star territory quite yet, but very good card that's very, very meta relevant. And of course, showing up in a ton of Paladin decks as such. And really, I think one of the stronger secrets, primarily because the Galloping Idiot itself has taunt, I think. And that has really proven disruptive to people when they aren't accounting for it. It comes down, it kind of messes up the turn. That feels really powerful. And the 3/4 stat line, of course, for only a 1 mana commitment is pretty nice too, or sometimes a 0 mana commitment if it comes off of the secret weapon. And even through a round of nerfs, Secret Paladin remains good, and Galloping Savior remains a really, really popular card in the meta, and I think really one of the best secrets. It's sometimes very frustrating to deal with this. Oh My Og probably takes that spot right now, but this one's hard to deal with as well, and that body on board presents a ton of counter pressure that Secret Paladin loves to leverage into their aggressive game plans as well, often chipping in that extra 3 damage or that body on board for a conviction. It all just adds up into the perfect sort of secret to fit into exactly what Secret Paladin is trying to do. So this one I thought would be awkward. It wouldn't fit the deck all that well. And in hindsight, it's the exact opposite. It's perfect. It does exactly what Secret Paladin has to do and it needs to do, and has really helped fuel the best deck in Hearthstone right now. All right, so moving on to another really meta dominant card here. It's the Kargal Pack Runner for Hunter, rated at 3.1 stars. The community thought this was going to be in like the bottom half of all cards in the expansion. Turns out it's really one of the best because it's been powering Face Hunter, and it's really, really good in Face Hunter. You look at the data on this card, it's kind of nuts sometimes what the mulligan win rates look like. And I myself, I thought this card was going to be good. It was going to be 4 stars, but even I'm sort of surprised by how good it is on occasion. I think I still, in some ways, underrated it because you can just build out some crazy boards early with, a simple coin and a 1 mana spell. And if your opponent doesn't answer it immediately, it just starts to snowball big time in the early game. And once you get ahead like that against some decks, it's just over. Face Hunter is going to steamroll from that point. And it sort of plays really nicely into the follow-up cards for Hunter as well, Trampling Rhino and Piercing Shot, where it's like keeping boards in check. It can help keep health totals low, and then you just smack them with your over-the-top damage stuff. So it fits perfectly, again, into the mold that Face Hunter has developed so far, and I think it really helps fuel that deck. There are, surprisingly, some Face Hunters who aren't running Kargal Pack Runner. There's like a split between lists, basically, but I think at this stage, most of the better lists are still utilizing the Kargal Pack Runner for early board dominance to great success. So another one people thought was going to be okay, but it turns out has been really, really, really strong and one of the most powerful cards in the set, I would say. And then finally here, it's Condemn for Priest. This is another one that was rated 3.1 stars, but one I in particular thought was going to be pretty bad. I gave this one 2 stars, and I remember frankly even being a little bit harsh on it. I think I was like kind of trashing it a little bit because I just did not think the numerical breakpoints on this one would get there. In other words, dealing 1 damage the first 4 turns of the game seemed terrible. Dealing 2 damage by turn 5 didn't seem great. It seemed okay. It's like kind of, a cheap, bad Holy Nova at that stage. And then by the time you got to turn 10, I thought dealing 3 damage would be, again, just merely okay. So I didn't really know why you'd ever run Condemn. And I'll be frank with you, I still don't. Like, I've played a fair bit of Priest. I have to admit, Condemn is actually pretty good. Like, it's had plenty of moments where I was like, oh yeah, that was the ticket. Condemn did it. That's all I needed. But I'm still surprised by it. Like, the numbers just add up more than I ever expected. It's still pretty bad the first 4 turns of the game, but post turn 5, Condemn often does feel good. I think it's more about like softening up and finding other cards to play alongside it that really work it well, because it is just so cheap, right? It's 2 mana that you can slot it into a turn while still doing so many other things that even if it's not getting you all the way there, or it's not, carrying the turn, it's so cheap you don't care because you could just do other stuff. And I thought that'd be a problem with Priest with a lack of card draw. Sometimes they run out of stuff to do if all their cards are cheap and they just have empty hands. But the generation for Priest has kept up enough that Condemn still fits into decks and it still makes sense. Now, Priest is not, the best deck right now in Hearthstone, but there are some controlled Priests at high ranks that are doing well that are utilizing Condemn. So it's proven to fit better in Priest than I expected. I do suspect this might be another card that as Priest gets access to more removal tools and they kind of refine their control style, Condemn could be left at the wayside a little bit, but it doesn't matter. It's already far exceeded my expectations personally. It's exceeded community expectations by at least a little as well. And I think that means one way or another, you have to consider this an underrated card and one I'm still kind of hating on for some reason, even though I've had a lot of fun playing this in Priest already personally. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for our most underrated Hearthstone cards. Which of these surprised you? Which did you know were going to be amazing? Because this is the time where everybody's a genius because there's no record of what you said. So you can just say, hey, I knew all these. I was 100% correct. I am the smartest Hearthstone player alive. And I'll just be like, yeah, okay, sure. I totally believe you. That said, though, seriously, curious to hear your thoughts on these. Thanks to our sponsor, Keeps, for helping us make this video. As always, check them out in the description below. But until then, thanks much to you guys, as always, for watching. And until next time, game on.